What is going on, guys? Dr. Andrew Fix back here for another episode on the code. Like I typically tell you guys, thank you so much for tuning in to this podcast, for listening, however you're doing this, if you're on the road or if you're hanging out on a computer. Really appreciate your time being on here. Again, we have an awesome interview lined up for you guys today. My friend Amanda Marek Carlson's joining us. She is a triathlete herself. She's a triathlon coach. And she has some awesome things going on that we're going to get into. So Amanda, thanks for joining me this morning.
Hey, Andrew, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. My pleasure. And we'll get into this a little bit later, but this is kind of cool. We've got two podcast hosts here talking to each other. So we'll talk a little bit about yours as we get going. But Amanda, would you do the listeners a quick favor and just, kind of introduce yourself? Where are you from? What are you doing? And how did you get into endurance triathlon?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm originally from the south suburbs of Chicago. About 6-7 years ago, knocked some sense in myself and brought myself up to Madison, Wisconsin. So that's where I reside now with my husband, Tim, and our dog, Whitty. Mm-hmm. I originally moved up here to get into race event management. So I became the director of timing operations at a local event management company. Completely fell in love with it. Working the long hours, producing events was a ton of fun. And I lucked out and I bumped into a nonprofit. The nonprofit's called Try for Schools. So our whole objective is to empower kids to be happy, healthy, and confident. And then we donate all the money from our youth events back to the kids' schools to support their physical education departments. So for the past year, I've now been the executive director for that organization, which has been amazing. And then, like you mentioned, in what little free time I have, I'm involved in triathlon myself as an athlete.
Yeah, that that organization sounds awesome, because I know, for the last how many years, one of the big pushes, which I think this is not what should be happening, but I know taking a lot of the extracurricular physical education classes, art and music and like all this stuff is oftentimes what gets trimmed or cut from school curriculum programs as, rather than kept in. And, I think those are the things that kids in particular need the most.
You are 100% right. Unfortunately, with the decreasing education budgets, all the extracurriculars and the things that, me personally, that I learned all of those major life lessons from teamwork to goal setting, confidence building. Yeah. Those are the programs that disappear first. So our main objective is really to expose kids to movement, build that lifelong skill, support their physical education departments, and hope that, they could have those skill sets, not just now, not just in the classroom, but outside and for their whole lives.
Mm-hmm. Well, and as a physical therapist who talks about movement every day, that's like music to my ears. And and I love it. I remember I was always the kid right in elementary or middle school who I'm like coming back to the regular class, like soaked in sweat from running around in gym class. And it takes me the whole next class period to like cool down and stop sweating. So I think I would have been, without recess, without gym class, I would have been struggling.
Absolutely. Yes, I was the same. I took the pacer test very seriously.
You got to win. Okay. Well, I guess that, it makes sense to me that like you have found yourself from a career path, like going into this side of things where it's obviously like a huge passion of yours too, and a huge part of your life up until that point. So you're from the suburbs of Chicago, you moved to Wisconsin, but when was it that you found yourself starting to get like introduced to or interested in endurance racing, triathlons? Like, where did that come from?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I started running as a kid. I started in right near the end of grade school, and I jumped into cross country in middle school, fell in love with it. It became my world between cross country and track. ran through high school, chose to go to North Central College in Naperville. And I ran there both cross country and track, 5K steeplechaser. Again, absolutely loved every minute of it. But then I noticed as I got deeper into that sport, my body kind of started to break down a little bit, bumped into some injuries. And I had a friend suggest, well, why don't you do triathlon? It's a little bit easier on the body, can switch it up, 3 different disciplines. And I knew nothing about triathlon coming into it, absolutely zero, except that it was swim, bike, run. And so my senior year of college, I think going into my last season as a college athlete, I decided, well, I'll try this sprint triathlon. And was 100% the one that panicked in the open water, was like pinning my bib to my shirt in transition. But from that moment, like knew 100%, like, this is what I'm doing when I graduate. And from there, it just, like you said, it became my passion. It became everything. And now it's my, career focus, not as an athlete, but, in the endurance world.
Yeah. It's so funny. And, I think you hear a very similar story a lot of times where it was either something you got into as a child, or like you got into one of those 3 disciplines, right, in your earlier years. And then someone goes down and gets into triathlon. More often than not, the story I hear is a runner got into it, as opposed to someone who was like, a good swimmer or something like that. But I've heard so many times from people that do tries, the some of the bumps along the way that they had in their early couple races where they struggled with transitions, or they forgot something, or they're on the bike and they're like, shoot, I left this water bottle back at my transition station. And then those things get ironed out the more and more that you do.
Absolutely. It's definitely, I have found it to be a trial by error type sport. You have to be very patient with it, and you tend to make more mistakes than you have successes for quite some time. And honestly, sometimes continuously, but that's the type of sport it is. And I think that's the type of sport that really, honestly, for me, makes it appealing.
Yeah. Well, and we talk about all the time in our world here at Physio Room with our clients, or just like in the athletic world, there gotta be some failures or things that you overcome that ultimately at the end of the day end up making you better for it. Whether that's an injury that you went through, or whether it was a mistake that happened, and you end up learning from those things.
Absolutely. It's all too often, I think people see really everything from sport to your professional life to social. Everybody sees it as a straight line, right? It's from the bottom to the top, straight line, but it's a lot of ups and downs. It's a lot of ups and downs. It's a lot of mistakes and getting back up and getting to that top of that straight line.
Yeah. So, okay. So you said you did a sprint triathlon towards the end of your time in college. And for those of you that don't know, Amanda just said she ran at North Central College in Illinois, or just in the Division III world in general, because I too competed in Division III. North Central has a great running program, and they are very often sending a lot of people on to the later meets in the years of cross country and track and field to the national championships and whatnot. So awesome program there. But obviously that falls in the real thick of the Midwest, and it's not always beautiful running weather there in Illinois. So, what did you find yourself doing, were you running straight through the winter, or how was that?
I mean, back in college, it took a lot to get us inside, whether it was snow or cold. But I have definitely noticed as I've gotten older, and still living in the Midwest, obviously. As we're recording this, it is currently -12 here in Wisconsin. I have become, it's much more easier to convince me to get inside for sure. So I definitely do a lot more now, at least variation with like, I'll get in and I'll get on the treadmill because it doesn't make sense to go run in the foot of snow we have outside, or that, you know, my skin may freeze instantly if I'm outside.
Yeah. I think I hear that a lot from people. And, you know, I think, Nora, who ultimately introduced us, I think she's kind of the same way. I see her, or hear her telling me more about, you know, she did a run on the treadmill, much more than she used to, you know, several years ago. So,
Absolutely.
So when was that, Amanda, that you were running and then you decided to do that first sprint triathlon? What kind of timeline are we talking about here?
Yeah, it was. So that first triathlon would have been like 2012, 2013. And then, like I said, from there I was hooked. So once I graduated college, it was dive right into an Olympic that summer. The following summer was do the half Ironman. And then I said, I need to do a marathon, an open marathon. And then we're signing up for the Ironman. And so in 2015, I signed up for my first full Ironman. And honestly, it's been pretty much a full Ironman every year since then, minus, you know, the little COVID gap we had there.
Sure. Yeah. Now, I don't know if they did this with Ironman. I know a lot of races, 5K, especially the shorter races, 5Ks, 10Ks. I know a lot of those during that COVID gap tried to, you know, just run the race virtually, right? Like you run the race and you take a picture of your watch and you submit the time or whatever. Did anything like that happen with any Ironman related events?
Ironman, for a while, they did kind of like this virtual series that you can like jump on every week and submit your times and stuff. But, you know, all of that required having a smart trainer and Zwift. And I honestly, like, for where I'm at in the sport, I'm a pretty old school person. Like, I still have my dumb trainer that's, you know, a wheel on, and, you know, I have my power meter and I do my workouts like that. I'm not on the video games or any of the fancy trainers.
Now, I definitely don't get on the bike trainer that often, but I have the exact same kind that you're describing, right? I put a different tire on and try not to wear out mine that I use outside, and it's set up in my garage, and you know, I'm just pedaling with all the statistics and without the screen and all this stuff. Now, I, from being involved in, you know, races, I have run for a lot of years, and I too ran, similar to you, ran cross country in middle school. And I would go straight from like cross country practice in middle school, straight to like outside of school football practice. And my parents, of course, are shuttling me around across town. And then I ran track in high school, track in college, along with, you know, playing football and wrestling and whatnot. So I'm somewhat familiar with the different race distances in triathlon. But just to make sure everybody listening to this is on the same page, will you just kind of go through what those look like? Like, what does it look like from a distance or a volume standpoint for a sprint triathlon versus an Olympic versus the half and full Ironman varieties?
So a sprint triathlon, that could vary a little bit. But usually it's like a 400-meter swim, maybe a 10 to 15 mile bike, and then a 5K run. And then the next step up from that is an Olympic triathlon, which is usually a 1,500-meter swim. So pretty big jump on the swim, a 25-mile bike, and then a 10K. And then when you get into the half Ironman, which really for me, like I kind of consider it a completely different world from the sprint Olympic to the jump into the half Ironman. That's when you're doing a 1.2 mile swim, 56-mile bike, and a half marathon. So 13.1. And then for that full Ironman, again, which is kind of a completely different world, now you're doubling all those distances. So 2.4 miles in the water, 112 on the bike, and 26.2 for the run.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I'm with you. I think there's obviously a jump, right, from the sprint to the Olympic distance, but looking at those numbers, that's a much smaller jump than once you start talking about doing that half Ironman. I mean, that's a pretty considerable jump to jump from the Olympic to that. And then of course, just double it going to the full. So there's a huge step up in the, amount of preparation and training that your body needs to be able to go and tolerate those things effectively. You regularly will see people very undertrained for 5Ks, 10Ks, half marathons,
Yes.
even full marathons. And you will see individuals be able to finish those things no matter how much time it takes. But quite often their body is trashed after that for quite a long time. You would be probably very hard pressed to find anyone who could complete a half distance Ironman, let alone a full, without putting in some considerable training time and preparation for those things.
Yes, you definitely see people. There's the occasional person that tries it. But like you said, it doesn't often end well. And I definitely, as an athlete who has done those distances, I definitely would not suggest going in under trained, just from the it not being a fun experience for you. And two, it's unsafe.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Not only from like an orthopedic physical injury standpoint, but a lot of other things, heat issues, and your body sort of shutting down on you for sure. Okay, so you started with the sprint, and gradually, just like most people probably do, you found yourself getting attracted to and training for the longer and longer races. But if I'm not mistaken, you actually had the opportunity. I know you've done this one in Madison a few times, the half Ironman there. But you have, or wait, no, it's a half Ironman, right? In Racine, where I'm from, but it's a full in Madison. Is that right?
They've actually moved the one from Racine. So my first half Ironman was in Racine. And then they ended up axing that one. And now there's both a full and a half in Madison.
Got it. Okay. Well, you had the opportunity, right? But to do that multiple times, and you actually ended up winning that race, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I did. So Wisconsin was my first Ironman in 2015. And so I was still living in Illinois then. And then decided in 2019, after I'd been living in Madison for a few years, decided I was going to do it again. And kind of to rewind a little bit, after that first Ironman, the goal for me really became qualify for the World Championships. And I, did full Ironmans in 16, 17, and 18, all close, but mistakes here, failures there, and couldn't hit that mark to qualify. And then in 2019, which is definitely the most fit I have ever been and the most mentally solid I've ever been, I qualified for the World Championships. So, right, the goal was just the age group win to get me to Kona. And about 18 miles in to the run, somebody told me, "Hey, you're winning the whole race." And I was a little bit dumbfounded because that definitely wasn't the goal. It wasn't the expectation. But I ended up winning the female overall amateur.
Awesome. And that was in 2019.
2019. Yep.
Cool. Now you started to say this right at the end there, but what is the sort of qualification requirement in order to qualify for the World Championships of Ironman?
Yeah, so everything is based on age group finishes. So to kind of equalize the differences in the courses, you really can't use a time standard because every Ironman race is so different. So what they do is they distribute qualifying slots based on the number of starters that are in your age group. So the higher number of starters you have, the more qualifying slots you get. So really you see your male 45 to 54 age groups end up with a good chunk of qualifying slots.
Yeah, a lot of people doing it.
Yeah, that's the largest demographic of people participating in Ironman triathlons. But then as you get down into those lower age groups and then the really higher age groups, you see a lot fewer. So really, if you're a female or male under the age of 34, you're going to have 1 to 2 slots. So you either have to win your age group or come in second. And so when I qualified, you had to win your age group.
Got it. Now, I don't know if you remember this, but in that age category, do you know roughly how many females in that age bracket were in that particular race?
Honestly, I'm not sure. I would probably guess somewhere between 50 and 100.
Yeah. Got it. Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't actually know that part, that like as your age bracket and the number of competitors goes up, there's potentially a few more slots. But I guess that makes sense with the courses being so different, right? It's really maybe it's really flat in some parts and it's very hilly in other areas for the bike and the run. So I guess that makes sense to kind of try to even the playing ground, so to speak.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, have you found for yourself and your training and everything that like your fitness and whatnot, you tend to not gravitate towards, but like you tend to perform better relative to your competition on a particular type of course, like one that's hilly versus one that's flat versus something else?
Yeah. Starting triathlon as a flatlander in Illinois, I always thought my strength was flat, just put the hammer down on the bike and push power for 5 hours. And then I got up to Wisconsin and I got my butt kicked for a couple years with how hilly it is here. But then I started to realize that I tend to be pretty aggressive, both uphill and downhill. And that has suited me really well. So it actually has kind of transitioned since I've moved here from feeling like the flat courses were my strength in comparison to really it's the hilly ones that I now seek out and seek out if I'm attempting to do well in my age group, that's where I'm going to gravitate towards. So same thing like this year, signing up for Wisconsin, going to do Wisconsin again. And what year are we in? 2023.
Yeah. Now, which lake there in Madison do you guys swim in for that race?
We swim in Monona. So the smaller of the 2 lakes that surround downtown.
Yeah. And that's what I was about to say. For those of you that don't know Madison, Wisconsin, it is right there, basically in between 2 lakes. And you will very often see a lot of people doing sports and activities out on that water and on the paths and trails around the area. Madison is a pretty active. I mean, I live here in the Denver area, a lot of very active people, but in Wisconsin, based on, what I know from living in the Racine and Waukesha area for most of my life, Madison's one of the more active cities that I'm aware of in Wisconsin. So
yeah, there's no shortage of things you can do to be active. And honestly, especially in the triathlon community, we're lucky, for what we have in the way of roads and, drivers for the most part that are safe and courteous of cyclists. But I mean, every year we're ranked in the top 10 for triathlon towns in the US. So it's definitely a benefit and an advantage to live here as an athlete.
Yeah, for sure. And, that's what you tend to see too, right? Is you see, no matter what sport or activity we're talking about, people that really enjoy and participate in particular activities, they tend to see themselves relocating to cities that really lend well towards that. I think that's why there's a big move of, especially like outdoors related sport athletes out here in Colorado, because there's so much stuff to do outdoors or, in Utah or Arizona or Idaho or anything else where there's a lot of outdoor skiing and snowboarding and whatnot. But yeah, Wisconsin has, and Madison in particular, has a lot of accessibility to triathlon. So great place to live for that. Now, Amanda, what do you think has been, obviously there's a lot of time and a lot of preparation that needs to go into training for one of these races. But there's a lot of people that do them, right? And I'm sure some people have very dedicated coaches, and I'm sure some people are just DIYing this on their own, and they're just training on their own and then going and competing. What have you found over the years that you've been doing this has sort of like made the biggest difference in your training? What are some of the things that you found like make you either perform better or not quite to the level that you were hoping to?
Yeah. Like you said, it's definitely important to note that there's no shortage of options to how you can do this and how you can be successful. So I'm a big advocate for anyone getting involved in the sport. I think it's totally doable, no matter kind of, what background you come from, what time you have, you can make it happen. But for me in particular, consistency is the most important thing. I have a very busy work schedule. I still try to make sure I prioritize social time and time with my husband. And that really does, start to limit when you can fit training in. And so for me in 2019, I was working a ton of hours. I was working a ton of weekends. And it really came down to what workouts are the most important, and where do I need to focus my time? So it was always hitting that long ride. So going into 2019, I did 10 100+ mile rides. So every week I was prioritizing, when am I going to fit in that ride? And that may have been in, a 5 to noon on a Friday because I was working on Saturday. But ultimately, I think, right, we live in a society where there's kind of like this need for instant gratification.
Totally.
There's this need for, I could go on Amazon and I could order whatever I want, and it's going to be here in 2 days. Or any, you have so many examples of that. And I think we see that people starting to apply that to both athletics and professional life, that they think, I'm going to start this and tomorrow I'm going to be a pro. And the hard truth of it is that is not the case. It is a lot of grinding, and it's a lot of just showing up every single day. You have to make that decision to show up and put the work in. And so for me, my most successful seasons have been when I prioritize those key workouts and I get those key workouts in, and then I'm able to fill in the gaps with what I'm able to fill in, because stress is stress. And if you try to cram in too much, it's not going to help you.
Yeah. And, hearing you say that just kind of reminds me of, like, for most of us, probably us two or anyone listening to this, there's probably not too many things in your life that either you've done or, that happened to you that felt really rewarding, that there wasn't quite a bit of like putting in time and effort in order to get there. Right. Putting in a lot of time and effort to achieve something or win something. I've not won the lottery, but I'm sure it feels much different, right? I'm sure it feels really cool to win the lottery. And maybe if you've purchased lottery tickets like every week for years, maybe you feel like you put in a lot of time and effort, but that requires no work, right? Like, it requires no dedication and no like effort. It requires money, but I'm sure that has a different feeling to like win the lottery versus like see yourself achieve something that you put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and time into in order to get to that point. And I think that's what we're, as of the recording of this, we're less than 2 weeks away from the Super Bowl. And I'm sure whatever team, the Eagles or the Chiefs, end up winning that's what you're going to hear the players say, right? All of the time they spent along the season and in training to get to this point. It's not like they just showed up on Super Bowl Sunday and they played better, so they win. Like, it's way more than that.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think you're right. That's what makes this so rewarding though, is that you don't just wake up and become a professional.
Yeah.
You put in the work and you have those ups and downs. And then hopefully you're there, there's that one day that it all clicks. And it's so much more rewarding. And you're so much, I think, more proud of that achievement when it's like that.
Yeah, totally. And you're absolutely right with this, like, instant gratification, or like things happen immediately, right? You can go online and buy something. You can find any kind of coach or training program or anything like that you want, but it's not like I can just pay for a IronMan training program and that's going to just work for me and turn me into some elite athlete if I don't put the time in to do the little things. And one thing that I think, all sports obviously take time, but we all have the same amount of time in the day, right? It's 24 hours long. Now, we all have different responsibilities. Some of us have families, some of us work different jobs. And, but you really use the term like priority, like what did you make a priority? And that's what got done. And you filled in the other things along the way. And what was kind of cool to hear you say was that you were still trying to keep some form of like balance, right? And I personally, I'm not a huge fan or advocate of the term like work-life balance, because I think there's so many different categories than that. And like, you're in a job that you are very passionate about and you enjoy. So I bet you there are times where you're like, elbows deep in doing a bunch of work stuff, but it doesn't always feel like work because you really are enjoying it. So I don't love that work-life balance term, but you were trying to keep yourself involved in all the different facets of your life while you were still trying to get this training in.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it's super important. I think, especially in triathlon, people tend to fall into this, like, put the blinders on and triathlon is everything. I need to hit every single workout. I can't miss a single day, no matter what, whether I am like laying in bed completely wiped out, or I have a million errands to run. For those with families, they have kids, sports, everything else. And too many times I see age groupers, especially, trying to train like professionals that can dedicate all of that time, their entire day, to training and recovery. And that's just not realistic for people, the quote unquote normal people, right? Like us non-professional athletes that are still performing at a high level. You really do need to maintain that balance, because triathlon shouldn't be your singular focus. You should still have that social time. And like you said, I am very, very lucky that I have, worked my way into a career where I'm so passionate about it, and it doesn't feel like I go to work every day. It all blends together, and I'm lucky that I don't need to use the words work-life balance.
Yeah, for sure. I'm just sitting here like, thinking about all that stuff that you said, and thinking about the time that it takes to train for some of these things. You mentioned, okay, you may be on this ride from like 5 till noon, but just to give people like an idea, you mentioned consistency and continuing to show up and make the choice to do the work every single day, or every single week, is what made one of the biggest differences for you. Now, probably the cycling is what takes the most time, right, to train for. What is going on these Century, if this bike ride is 112 miles, what is going on one of these Century training rides typically take from a time standpoint on a day?
Depending on how well your ride goes.
For sure.
It could
assuming
be
you have no mechanical difficulties, you're not like changing tires every 20 miles or something. And assuming you have hopefully no like massive digestive issues or something, and you're stopping every 20 minutes to use the restroom, but you just have like a fairly uneventful, in a good way, kind of ride.
Usually for me, it'll be, between getting ready and getting on the bike to getting off the bike, it could be anywhere from 5.5 to 6.5 hours. We've definitely had our fair share of rides with mechanicals and breakdowns and rainstorms and being out there for 8.5 hours. But usually, I mean, you're setting aside a good part of your day to get out there and do that ride.
Yeah, like a third of your entire day, basically. So, if you do have one of those rides where you're just having all sorts of issues, right? You're having gear issues, you're having tire issues, you're having, some body issues that are, like maybe digestive and whatnot. In some respects, going into it, that those things are, they're just like part of it. Eventually, they're going to basically happen to everyone.
Yeah.
Right. Now, do you find yourself when those things happen, do you find yourself, like getting super frustrated over that? Or you're just kind of like, well, I knew this was bound to happen eventually. We'll just change this tire and get on with it.
Of course, there's that like instant frustration of, there being a speed bump in your ride. But ultimately, to be a successful athlete, you need to have some of those rides, right? You need to know how to change a tire. You need to know basic maintenance of your bike. You need to know how to adjust your nutrition if you are running into GI issues or if you have low energy. Because what's to stop any of that from happening on race day?
Yeah. Have you had that happen on a race day? Any mechanical issues or major issues once you were through like kind of the initial bumps of getting your transitions to run smoothly and everything? Did you run into any like major transition issues or major mechanic issues like during one of your big races?
Knock on wood, I have not run into any major mechanicals out on a race. I've had a couple issues with like a launched bottle or a broken bottle, which, does affect nutrition and figuring out how you're going to replace that. But hopefully, no flats, no real major mechanicals minus a couple drop chains.
Yep. Now I know one of the, obviously you have put in a lot of time and effort. You've qualified for the IronMan World Championships and like you've done some amazing things, which is one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you. Cause like on this podcast, The Code, we are trying to talk to like experts in or people who have really pushed kind of the limits of, health and wellness. But since we started getting on this topic of like dealing with adversity, right? I know you just said you fortunately haven't gone through too many like, bike issues or transition issues or anything like that, but you have had to overcome and deal with some challenges in some of your racing history. And your ability to, kind of work through that and continue to work and put yourself back in these situations in spite of that, I think is one of the most awesome things and awesome parts of your story. Would you be willing to share a little bit of that for us and some of the stuff that you've gone through in some of your races that, probably shaped a little bit of like your perspective and how you view these things?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I started chasing Kona essentially it took me 6 years to get there and to finally be able to race it. And I had a lot of races that, had points where it was like, yep, this is going great. This is it. This is the day. And then you blow up and fall apart. In 2016, I went in with some like kind of sciatica stuff going on. And it was kind of like, let's just see how long I could make it through the run. And 11 miles in was just gone. We dragged the leg to the finish line and that day was kind of blown. But that particular race, and that was 2016, was the one where, I blew up, but in addition to blowing up, I stopped having fun. I was just miserable. And ultimately, I'm doing this sport, one, because it helps me be healthy. Two, I get to push myself both mentally and physically. But this is a lot of my social time. This should be fun.
Totally.
And so that was the first race where I was like, I am never going to do that again. If a race goes poorly, I'm going to still try to have fun and enjoy this.
Mm-hmm.
In 2017, went back to Ironman Louisville, and I had a really solid race. It was a good race. My time compared to the previous year's age group winner was faster, but I finished 5th in my age group. So that was that first lesson. And like, you have to control what you could control. I can't control the weather. All I could do is maintain my bike the best I can. And I can't control who shows up. I have to run my race, and where the cards fall, they fall.
Yeah, totally.
And that one was a little bit harder to swallow, right? Because you're like, well, no, my time was better. Like, I should have been first. And I wasn't. Then in 2018, that was by far my biggest blow up. I went to Ironman Florida. It was the year of Hurricane Michael, so they moved it to Haines City. So it quickly became a very different course. But I got started, had a great day, had a great swim, great bike, got off onto the run, and about a mile in, I knew something was very, very wrong. And I actually have had, since I was diagnosed when I was 7, I have a minor seizure disorder. And that disorder really just affects one side of the brain. So it's very rare that I have, like, the traditional seizure that you'll see in a movie, or on a show. It's less convulsions, and it's more lack of balance. Sounds bother me, vision gets blurry. It's very challenging to, like, you feel very uncoordinated. You're kind of in this like super dreamlike state. Not a super comfortable position to be in. And instantly on that run, I started feeling like this may end poorly. I could end up on the ground here pretty soon. But being the stubborn athlete I am, we pushed along. And I had kind of been just dropping backward consistently. I went from 2nd overall in the race to 3rd, 4th in my age group. But kept going, kept pushing. And about mile 24, I was like, you know what, just risk it. Still like completely in a daze, completely out of it. And got to the final turn, and there was like, we went from sidewalk to grass. And that sidewalk to grass transition was enough to like throw me off balance.
Sure.
And I was on the ground. So had a seizure 400 meters from the finish line. And again, being the stubborn person I am, and knowing what happened and knowing my body, whether it was right or wrong, I crawled to the finish line. So it was like 45-minute last mile. But I got to the finish line. And one, that finish was gratifying, in that, I didn't give up despite everything that had just happened. But it was also an opportunity to look back and say, well, why did this happen? And that was really when my coach and I started evaluating nutrition and what was happening on the bike, and that we were always kind of so focused on like, well, why do I blow up on the run? I have a great swim and a great bike, and I blow up on the run every time. What we finally started looking at is like, well, what if I'm completely gone on the bike already? And so that was the huge lesson for 2019, was nutrition and figuring out what I needed on the bike in order to run well. And so we did that. We revamped it. I really worked on just consistently hitting the priority workouts. And, I ran a 3:32 off the bike, which was faster than my open marathon PR.
So which is wild, right? To think about that you could go sign up for and run a marathon, in your time that you did that in, you beat that at the end of a triathlon, right? That is wild.
Yes.
Now, hearing you tell that story, one, I think just like you said, it's a huge testament that you finished that race in 2018, despite your body basically telling you like, stop, right? Things are shutting down. But you were able to finish the race. Did that experience that you went through, well, I think I know the answer, but like, did that experience make you more concerned to do triathlons after that, like in 2019 in the future, or did it make you like more determined to want to do it? Did you want to do it more, or were you like a little hesitant?
I am, because I mentioned, I was diagnosed with this seizure disorder when I was 7. And I am beyond thankful that my mom at the time, when this happened, and I was very active as a child, played baseball, all the different things. She had a doctor tell her, well, you need to take her out of all sports, kind of like you have to put her in a bubble and that's going to be her life. And, my mom basically gave that doctor a unpleasant finger and walked out. And she found a doctor that said, no, she can do everything. We just need to figure out what she needs. What are this, what does stress look like? What is sleep like? What medications are right? And so her doing that really kind of set up that trajectory for me to make those decisions as I became an adult. So I've never taken the approach of, oh, well, I should stop doing this. It never has crossed my mind to stop doing this. It's just, I need to step back and look at, well, why did this happen? And how do I make it not happen?
Yeah. And I think, not having had that situation happen to me, but, kind of forecasting like, well, what if something like that's happened? I hope I handle it in a very similar way because, I already mentioned the Super Bowl. I'm a huge football fan. Several weeks ago, we just had this situation happen where Damar Hamlin on the Buffalo Bills had a freak incident happen on the field where he went into cardiac arrest. And, I have seen so many different kind of takes from analysts or from fans or whatnot on the internet about, people saying how he should never play football again. And I just find myself like not necessarily agreeing with that. And what I'm definitely not saying is that he did not have an extremely traumatic event happen to him. He definitely did. Fortunately, it was handled well at the time. But ultimately, the only person or people that can make that decision is him, his family, and his medical professionals that he's consulting with, right? And the chances that what happened to him happens are so slim and so small that if, the medical professionals he's working with and himself and his family, if they feel like he is able to get back into the physical condition that it takes to play a sport at a high level like that, to, talk about what the risks are and what the risks are not. And if he decides that it's appropriate for him to try and continue playing football, I don't think he should feel like he shouldn't do that just because of, something negative had happened to him, because, there are implications on that decision one way or the other, right? Either he's missing something that he probably really enjoys and has spent his whole life preparing for, or he plays knowing what some of the risks are and what could happen. So I think it's awesome that your mom kind of tried to find different opinions and find ways to help you manage something and still participate, rather than just saying you can't do this and this is why.
Yeah. And with the Damar Hamlin situation, I completely agree with you. The important part of this is that you do the right things. Totally. Right. You seek out answers, you seek out the right resources, you recover appropriately. And you make that decision with the people that support you. I'm very, very lucky in that I have this crazy, amazing village of people that have sacrificed so much to help me be the athlete I am. And those are definitely things that you take into consideration when you do have kind of one of those traumatic events, but you want to keep going.
Yeah, totally. So with this big nutrition kind of change and reevaluation process that you went through from 2018 to 2019, for you personally, what were some of the things that you and your coach, and what did you guys find out, and what were some of those changes that you made so that you were able to perform better, getting off the bike, finishing the run, and finishing the race with, appropriate energy levels and fueling and all that? What were some of the changes you made?
Yeah. So I've kind of always had a bit of like a sensitive stomach. And so I noticed pretty quickly in my Ironman career that solid foods weren't great for me. So I had tried to do everything in liquid form. And so I was using a certain sports product and was just filling that bottle, concentrating that bottle with all the calories I needed, which is okay. But we learned that I wasn't getting enough water with that, right? The more calories you put into that bottle, the more filling a bottle halfway full with powder, the less water you're putting in. And eventually it becomes time where even though you're drinking all that liquid, there's not enough fluid coming in with it. And so what we decided was, we got to find the calories some other way. And we have to get more water in. And so I switched products, and I now use a product called Osmo. And I specifically use the one that is formulated for women. So it has a couple different sugars in it that are kind of have been proven to absorb better for the female body. Got it. And it is more focused. It's less calorie heavy and more hydration. And finally found something stomach wise that would work to be able to eat more of like a solid food. So oddly enough, I do the whole gels or blocks. And then halfway through my ride, I have a Snickers. And that's what does it. That's what does it for me.
That is so interesting. Well, the hydration piece makes great sense because, whether or not the race is being held in a warm environment, which typically it is because you're swimming 2.5 miles, but you're losing a lot of fluid. You're losing a lot of electrolytes and sweat and fluid. So not only do you need to replace the electrolytes, you also need to replace the fluid, right? To help with all the things, cooling your body, regulating your blood flow, like everything from a fluid standpoint. That is interesting about the Snickers. But in that type of a situation, your body's going to use whatever it can for fuel. And there are a lot of different components in a bar like that, right? There's sugar, there's fat, there's salt, and some sodium in there. So it's interesting. What mile usually do you end up eating that? It's like halfway through the bike or what?
It's usually like halfway through.
That is so funny. But you've noticed that allows you, like those changes have allowed you to feel better and feel stronger in the later stages of the race.
Exactly. I feel like when I get off the bike, I have the energy to go out and run a marathon. I may not want to run that marathon, but I can.
There's a big mental portion to that too, of wanting to do that.
It's a huge mental component to this whole sport.
Okay, so I think those things that you've gone through, the trials and tribulations you've had, not only from like a training standpoint, but a body standpoint that's unique to you, and not everyone's going to have that same experience, probably gives you a little different perspective on doing something like this. Is any of that what kind of led to the what I want to do is I want to open up an opportunity for you to talk about your podcast, but like is any of that what kind of led to you hold a podcast too, where if I understand right, you're kind of talking about people that have gone through some adverse situations and sharing their stories and whatnot.
Yeah. So I recently became a co-host on a podcast called Power in the Granny Gear, with a couple of real good friends of mine. And the whole idea behind it, right, for those that aren't necessarily bikers, the granny gear is referred to, it's your lowest gear. It's the easiest gear. But the idea behind it is that like you could still produce a lot of power in the granny gear. And so what we wanted to do was really kind of seek out people that have those stories, those really empowering stories where people have overcome adversity in many different ways. And it's not, we're not bringing on all the crazy famous people and really focusing in on the stories, we're focusing in on your everyday people that have stories that you don't hear.
Yeah, I think if I've learned anything, it's, the stories that you do hear, right? The ones that are on TV and all the stuff it's usually because those people were already somewhat in the spotlight.
Yeah.
But normal people like you and I have just as impressive and tremendous stories. You just, like you said, we just don't all know about them, but they're not any less, massive of a story or a thing that they've overcome. These things happen to people every single day.
Exactly. Yeah, you nailed it.
When did you guys start that show?
So that show started just over a year ago. And then I was asked to join just a handful of months ago. So it's been a lot of fun and very rewarding. Just another one of those fun side things to add more to my plate.
Yeah, totally. Exactly. I'll have to go give some more of those episodes a listen and hear more of those stories. But for those of you that are listening to this, please go check out that podcast that Amanda's the co-host on, and we'll make sure that link is in the show notes as well, so you can easily find that. Amanda, of the people that you've had the opportunity to kind of interview on there, is there one story in particular that like stands out, one episode that you would recommend checking out?
Yeah, so it was actually an episode before I was on the show. But what we do is we kind of have these series, and each series has a different theme. And the series was life after retirement. And we weren't using retirement in the traditional sense of the word, right? Like moving on from your career, the whole idea of, well, you're 65 now, or at least 65. Yeah. It was kind of the idea of what's next in any chapter of your life when you move on past anything. And so we interviewed one of our teammates. His name is Ed Marek, and he is just an incredibly inspirational guy who has recently had to move on from triathlon because of some health issues that really put him in danger if he's out on the roads in the bike. And he just had some incredible things to say, really about time, right? Which is one of the most valuable things out there. And how you choose to spend your time. And so I would definitely consider, if you want a good cry, and if you want to really look at your life and what that trajectory is and see what's very important to you, I would definitely suggest a listen on Ed's episode.
Yeah, I'll absolutely go do that, because I did not catch that one, and appreciate the recommendation.
Yeah.
Amanda, in terms of, training and triathlon or any of the stuff that we got into, or anything else, or anything that we left out of this that you wanted to make sure to mention before we start the process of, winding this down and wrapping this up?
Yeah, for sure. And I think I touched on it a little bit, but like I said, I really do believe that anybody from any background can do this sport. And it's going to look different for everybody. So I think it's really important to not compare yourself to every other athlete. Because what they do is going to be a lot different than what you do, and your success may not look like their success.
Totally.
So for anybody getting into the sport, anybody in the sport, whether you're a top age grouper, professional, don't know how to swim, you really need to just show up and do the right things.
Yeah. I think that's so good, in whether we're talking about sports or fitness or anything else, right? Like, your journey is not someone else's journey. And even though it is so easy with social media and all this stuff to like easily try to compare yourself to what you think someone else is doing. And the reason I say what you think is because you don't know what's happening behind Instagram and behind Facebook and TikTok and everything. You don't see all that part necessarily. But that comparison can really zap the fun or the joy out of a lot of things if that's the trap you kind of get yourself stuck in. And then, you maybe end up doing things for the wrong reasons and not just for the pure enjoyment and personal satisfaction you get out of it. So I think that's an awesome thing to end with. Just, write your own story and show up consistently. And then you'll see that reap the rewards that you want. Amanda, thanks again so much for joining me on this episode here of The Code. I really appreciate your time and hope that you have an awesome rest of the day. And for all of you guys that tuned in to listen to this and made it to the end of this episode, thank you so much again for tuning in to us here on The Code. You've heard me say this before, but if you're finding things on here that you're enjoying hearing, you're getting some value out of this, we would love for you to let us know that. Whatever podcast platform or website you're on, go hop on there and leave us a review and share some of the things that you appreciated out of this. We really have a goal. We're trying to get up to 200 5-star reviews on this podcast so that we can get it out in front of more eyes and ears and spread these messages to more and more people. So again, Amanda, I hope you have an awesome day, and thank you so much for joining me.
You too. Thank you.
Absolutely. We'll catch you guys next time here on another episode of The Code. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.